The history books will tell you they met at Sun Studio under the bright lights of Sam Phillips's ambition. But the real story, the one that smells of stale bourbon and desperate sweat, happened in the dark. It was a Tuesday night in Memphis, late 1954, a night that felt heavy with humidity and bad decisions. There were no cameras, there were no reporters, just two men who were about to set the world on fire, circling each other like stray dogs in a cage. One was wearing pink and shaking with a nervous energy that looked like a seizure. The other was wearing black, and standing so still, he looked like a hole in the universe. They weren't icons yet. They were just hungry, broke, and terrifyingly talented. And when the door to that dive bar swung open, the air pressure in the room dropped so violently that everyone holding a glass felt it crack in their hands. This is the story of the night rock and roll was forged, not in a studio, but in a shadowy corner of a Memphis dive, fueled by jealousy, admiration, and a bottle of cheap whiskey. We are taking you back to the moment before the fame, before the pills, before the tragedies, to witness the raw nuclear collision of Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us your city in the comments. And here's the question that divides music history. If these two had fought that night instead of played, who would have won? The Memphis Flash or the Man in Black? Subscribe right now because we are about to unlock the secret history of the night. The music changed forever. The air inside the bar was a physical substance, a toxic gumbo of cigarette smoke, spilled lager, and the sour, metallic tang of desperation. It was the kind of place where dreams went to die quietly in the corner, drowned out by the noise of a jukebox that only played sad songs. Johnny Cash sat at a small, wobble-legged table in the back, his long frame folded into a chair that was too small for him. He wasn't the Man in Black yet. He was just JR, a failed appliance salesman with a pregnant wife at home and a head full of songs that nobody wanted to hear. He had holes in his shoes. He had 75 cents in his pocket. And he had a fire in his belly that was slowly burning a hole through his ulcer. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass, watching the light fracture through it. He wasn't drinking to get drunk. He was drinking to numb the voice in his head that told him to give up, to go back to Arkansas to pick cotton like his daddy. The bar was mostly empty, populated by the usual suspects. A couple of truck drivers arguing about the price of diesel, a waitress with tired eyes and aching feet, and a few shadows lurking in the booths. The jukebox was playing a Hank Williams tune, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," and the high, lonesome sound seemed to be mocking Johnny. He gripped the glass tighter. He hated his day job. He hated the way he had to beg housewives to buy vacuum cleaners they didn't need. He looked down at his hands. These were hands meant for a guitar neck, not a sales brochure. He felt like a coiled spring, wound so tight that one wrong touch would make him explode. He was waiting for something, though he didn't know what. A sign, a break, or maybe just the courage to walk into the Mississippi River and keep walking. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door at the front of the bar slammed open, letting in a gust of hot street air and the sound of traffic, silencing the room instantly. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the streetlights, a silhouette that looked like it had been cut out of a comic book. Even in the shadows, he vibrated. Elvis Presley. He was 19 years old, but he carried himself with a strange, jittery confidence that didn't match his age. He was wearing a pink shirt with the collar turned up, black trousers with a pink stripe, and white buck shoes that were scuffed grey from pacing. His hair was piled high, greased with rose oil and Vaseline, a chaotic sculpture that defied gravity. He didn't look like anyone else in Memphis. He looked like an alien who had crash-landed in the South and was trying to blend in by wearing the loudest clothes possible. He stepped into the bar and the energy shifted. The truck drivers stopped talking. The waitress looked up, her tiredness replaced by a sudden, predatory curiosity. Elvis didn't walk. He prowled. He moved with a loose-limbed, kinetic energy, his eyes darting around the room, nervous and electric. He wasn't famous yet. Not really. He had a local hit, That's All Right, playing on the radio, but he was still driving a truck for Crown Electric during the day. He was a local curiosity, the hillbilly cat, with the weird name and the even weirder voice. But to Johnny Cash, sitting in the darkness of the back booth, seeing Elvis was like looking into a mirror and seeing a distorted reflection. Johnny was darkness. Elvis was light. Johnny was silence. Elvis was noise. Johnny was the earth. Elvis was the electricity that scorched it. Johnny watched him over the rim of his glass. He felt a pang of something ugly in his chest. Jealousy, maybe. Or maybe it was recognition. He saw the same hunger in Elvis's eyes, the same desperate need to be heard, to be seen, to be someone. Elvis scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the truck drivers, skipping over the waitress until they locked onto the man in the shadows, and for a moment, the two future kings froze, acknowledging the threat in the room. Elvis walked towards the bar, his movements twitchy. He drummed his fingers on the wood counter, tap, 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 a rhythm that was faster than the Hank Williams song playing. "Coke," he muttered to the bartender, his voice a soft, polite mumble that contrasted with his loud clothes. "With a lot of ice, sir." He was polite. A mama's boy. Johnny scoffed quietly. He took a sip of his whiskey, the burn familiar and grounding. He watched Elvis lean against the bar, his legs shaking uncontrollably. The kid couldn't stand still. It was as if he had a generator inside him that was overcharging his nervous system. Johnny stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. Scrappy! The sound cut through the room like a knife. Elvis jumped, spinning around, his eyes wide. Johnny stepped out of the shadows. He was tall, 6'2", looming over the room. He walked with a slow, deliberate heavy-footedness, the walk of a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He approached the bar, stopping 3 feet from Elvis. The visual contrast was jarring. The black coat against the pink shirt, the stoic granite face against the twitchy, sneering lip. They didn't speak for a long 10 seconds. They just breathed the same smoke-filled air. The bartender wiped a glass, glancing between them, sensing that a fight might break out. Or something worse. This wasn't just two musicians meeting. This was the collision of two distinct philosophies. One was the sacred, the gospel, the polite boy who loved his mother. The other was the profane, the sinner, the man who had seen the darkness in the fields of Arkansas. Johnny broke the silence first, his voice a deep, resonant bass that seemed to vibrate the floorboards beneath Elvis's feet. "I heard your record," Johnny said. It wasn't a compliment, it was a statement of fact. His voice was flat, devoid of the fawning adoration Elvis was starting to get from teenage girls. Elvis blinked, surprised by the directness. He smoothed his hair back, a nervous tick. "Oh yeah?" Elvis replied, his voice jumping an octave higher than usual. "Which one?" Johnny took a step closer, invading Elvis's personal space. He smelled of Old Spice and bourbon. "The one where you sound like a black man," Johnny said. It was a dangerous thing to say in Memphis in 1954. The tension in the room spiked. Was it an insult? Was it an accusation? Elvis stiffened. His lip curled up, not in a snarl, but in that trademark defensive grin. "That's just how I feel it," Elvis said, his voice dropping, suddenly serious. "That's just how it comes out." Johnny stared at him. He was looking for a crack in the armor. He was looking for the fake, but he didn't find it. He saw a kid who was terrified of his own talent, a kid who had opened a door to a room he didn't know how to control. Johnny nodded slowly. He respected that. He reached into his coat pocket. Elvis flinched, perhaps expecting a knife. But Johnny pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He offered one to Elvis. Elvis shook his head. "I don't smoke, sir." Johnny smirked. "You will," he said. He lit his own cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating the scars on his face, the roadmap of a hard life. "My name's Cash," he said, exhaling a cloud of blue smoke that drifted between them. "J.R. Cash." Elvis relaxed, the tension draining from his shoulders but staying in his legs. "Elvis," he said, extending a hand. As they shook hands, the jukebox suddenly died, the needle scratching across the record with a violent hiss, plunging the room into absolute silence. That handshake shouldn't have happened. By all laws of physics, matter and antimatter should explode when they touch, but instead of an explosion, there was a spark, a recognition. Johnny felt the calluses on Elvis's fingers, guitar player calluses. Elvis felt the crushing grip of a man who had picked cotton until his hands bled. They were brothers in a war that hadn't officially started yet. The bartender, sensing the shift, slammed a fresh Coke on the counter for Elvis and poured another shot for Johnny. "You two gonna stand there staring at each other, or are you gonna do something useful?" the bartender grumbled. He pointed to the corner of the room. There, resting against the wall, was a battered acoustic guitar with one missing tuning peg. It belonged to the bar, used by drunks to slur out, "Happy birthday." It was a piece of junk. But to the two men standing at the bar, it looked like Excalibur waiting in the stone. Elvis looked at the guitar. Then he looked at Johnny. The nervous twitch returned to his leg. He wanted to play. He needed to play. It was the only way he knew how to talk without stammering. But he was intimidated. The big man in black frightened him. Johnny saw the look. He finished his drink in one swallow, slamming the glass down. He walked over to the corner, picked up the guitar, and dusted it off. He tuned the low E string, twisting the peg until it groaned into place. He didn't play a chord. He just hit the wood of the guitar body with the palm of his hand, thump. A drum beat. He looked at Elvis. "You say you feel it?" Johnny challenged, his voice low and dangerous. "Show me." Elvis didn't hesitate. He walked over, grabbed the neck of the guitar while Johnny held the body, and in that bizarre, improvised embrace, they prepared to make a sound that shouldn't have been possible. The physics of the moment made no sense. It was clumsy, awkward. Two grown men crowded around a cheap instrument like children fighting over a toy. But then the rhythm started. Johnny didn't know the chords Elvis was reaching for, so he didn't try to play them. Instead, he turned his right hand into a hammer. He struck the upper bout of the guitar body, thump. It was a hollow, woody sound, dead and dry. Thump. He set a tempo. It wasn't the fast, swinging beat of the radio. It was a slow, marching cadence. The beat of a chain gang, the beat of a heart that's tired of beating. Elvis looked at Johnny's hand, his eyes wide. He had never seen anyone treat a guitar like a drum before. It was disrespectful, it was violent, and it was exactly what he needed. Elvis clamped his fingers onto the fretboard, pressing down on an E major chord with such force that his fingertips turned white. He didn't strum gently. He attacked the strings. Whang! The sound was tinny and sharp, cutting through the smoky air of the bar like a razor blade. He tried to speed up, his leg bouncing nervously, trying to push the tempo into a frenzy. Thump! Johnny hit the wood harder, dragging him back. "Slow down, boy." The visual was mesmerizing. Elvis, the nervous energy, trying to fly. Johnny, the anchor, forcing him to stay on the ground. They weren't playing a song. They were wrestling for control of the time signature. The bartender stopped washing glasses. The truck drivers turned around in their stools, mouths slightly open. They weren't watching music. They were watching a dominance hierarchy being established in real time. "Well, that's all right, Mama." Elvis breathed the words. He wasn't singing to the room. He was singing to himself, a frantic mantra to keep the anxiety at bay. Johnny watched him. He saw the way Elvis's lip curled, not in a sneer but in a spasm of pure emotion. Johnny leaned in, his face inches from Elvis's shoulder, his voice a low rumble beneath Elvis's tenor. "Don't sing it like you're asking permission," Johnny growled, keeping the beat steady. Thump. "Sing it like you're leaving." Elvis's eyes snapped open. He looked at Johnny and something clicked. The fear evaporated, replaced by a sudden hot flash of defiance. Elvis hit the strings harder, breaking the rhythm, syncopating it. He threw his head back and let out a wail, "That's all right," that shattered the atmosphere of the dive bar. It wasn't country. It wasn't blues. It was a siren. For 3 minutes, the Hideaway bar in Memphis ceased to exist on Earth. It was transported to somewhere else, a place between the church and the brothel. Johnny kept the train beat going, his hand red and stinging from hitting the wood. But he didn't stop. He was the engine, Elvis was the steam. They played a bastardized version of an old spiritual, turning peace in the valley into a rockabilly riot. Elvis was shaking all over now, the Holy Ghost taking hold of him. But it was a secular ghost. He was gyrating, his hips hitting the side of the table, his pink shirt soaked through with sweat. Johnny stood like a statue, the only moving part his rhythmic hand and his eyes, which were locked on Elvis with a mixture of admiration and terror. He realized then and there, this kid is going to burn the world down. The song ended not with a fade-out, but with a crash. Elvis broke a string, the A string snapped with a pathetic plink, and the spell was broken. Heavy breathing filled the silence. Elvis slumped against the wall, chest heaving, hair falling over his eyes. Johnny stepped back, shaking his hand out, the palm bruised. The bar was silent. Nobody clapped. You don't clap after a lightning strike. You just check to see if you're still alive. The bartender slowly poured 2 more shots of whiskey, his hands shaking slightly. He slid them down the counter. "On the house," he muttered. "Whatever the hell that was." Johnny took a sip of the whiskey, wincing as it hit his ulcer. He looked at Elvis, who was drinking a Coke with 2 hands, looking like a little boy again. The transformation was terrifying. 1 minute a sex symbol, the next a polite truck driver. "You got a demon in you, son," Johnny said quietly. It wasn't an insult. In Johnny's world, demons were just neighbors you learned to live with. Elvis looked up, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "My mama says it's a gift from God," he whispered. Johnny laughed, a dry barking sound. "God gives the voice," Johnny said, leaning forward into the light. "But the devil gives the hips. You gotta decide who's driving the car." Elvis frowned, looking genuinely troubled. He picked at the label on his Coke bottle. "I just want to make people feel good, Mr. Cash. I just want to buy my mama a house. Is that wrong?" Johnny studied him. He saw the innocence, and he saw how fragile it was. He saw the future, or a version of it. He saw the screaming girls, the gold records, the pills, the isolation. He wanted to warn him. He wanted to tell him to run back to the truck and never look back. "Hey, it ain't wrong," Johnny said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "But it has a cost. You give them what they want, they'll take everything you have. They'll eat you alive, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the suit." Elvis went quiet. The neon light formed the window flickered, casting his face in red, then black, then red. He looked out the window at the empty street. "I'm scared of the silence," Elvis admitted, his voice barely audible. "When the music stops, I feel like I disappear." Johnny nodded. He knew that feeling. It was the reason he was in a bar on a Tuesday night instead of home with his wife. "That's why we play loud," Johnny said, "to drown out the quiet." "I wrote this," Johnny said. "Nobody wants it. Says it's too sad." Elvis picked up the paper. He read the title, "I Walk the Line." He read the lyrics, his lips moving silently. "I keep a close watch on this heart of mine." Elvis looked up, his eyes wet. He understood. It wasn't a love song. It was a desperate plea for control. It was a song about trying not to fall into the abyss. "It's beautiful," Elvis said. "But it's a lie, ain't it?" Johnny stiffened. "What do you mean?" Elvis tapped the paper. "You say you keep a close watch, but you're here drinking whiskey in the dark with a man you don't know." Elvis smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "We don't walk the line, Johnny. We walk the edge. And sooner or later, one of us is gonna fall off." "Maybe," Johnny said, standing up. The mood had shifted. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the armor. "But I plan on climbing back up." Elvis remained seated. He looked up at Johnny, and for a second he looked ancient. "I hope so," Elvis said, "because I don't think I can." Johnny didn't look back. He pushed the door open, stepping out into the humid Memphis night. But as the door swung shut, he heard one last sound from the booth. It wasn't a guitar chord. It wasn't a song. It was the sound of ice rattling in a glass as a shaking hand tried to lift it, a sound of instability that would echo for the next 20 years until a bathroom floor in Graceland went silent forever. The door to the hideaway bar didn't just close behind Johnny Cash that night, it sealed a pact. They went their separate ways into the stratosphere, 2 rockets launched from the same muddy launch pad, aiming for different stars. Elvis went to the moon. He became the king, wrapped in ermine and diamonds, isolated in the penthouse of the world. Johnny went into the earth. He walked through the ring of fire, drug busts, broken marriages, and prison concerts, becoming the voice of the downtrodden. They rarely spoke of that night. It was a secret coordinate on a map they both tried to lose. But the prophecy of the bar hung over them like a thunderhead. One of us is gonna fall off. Johnny Cash was 45 years old, clean, sober, and standing on solid ground for the first time in a decade. He was looking out the window at the lake, watching a heron take flight when the phone rang. He didn't want to answer it. He felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck, a phantom sensation he hadn't felt since 1954. He picked up the receiver. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was June. She was crying. Not the soft tears of joy, but the jagged, gasping sobs of devastation. "John," she whispered, "he's gone." She didn't have to say the name. There was only one he in their universe. Johnny gripped the desk. The wood creaked under his hand. "Elvis?" he asked, though he already knew. "He died on the floor, John." His heart stopped. Johnny slowly hung up the phone. The click echoed in the silent room. He didn't cry, not yet. He sat down in his leather chair, the weight of the news pressing him into the upholstery. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. There, tucked under a stack of contracts, was a small faded object. A guitar pick, a white, medium-gauge pick he had pocketed by mistake that night at the hideaway. He rubbed it between his thumb and finger. He thought about the conversation in the booth. "I'm scared of the silence," Elvis had said. "When the music stops, I feel like I disappear." Johnny closed his eyes. He could see the bathroom at Graceland. He could feel the silence there. The music had finally stopped for the king. The boy who wanted to buy his mama a house had been eaten alive by the very thing he created. "For you fell off, didn't you, son?" Johnny whispered to the dark. The wind rustled the trees, sounding like a distant applause. Johnny realized with a sickening clarity that it could have been him. It should have been him. He had taken the same pills, driven the same dark roads, stared into the same abyss. But June had grabbed his hand. Elvis had no one to grab his. The survivor's guilt washed over him, heavy and cold. He pulled the guitar pick out of his pocket. He looked at it one last time, a relic of a night that changed everything. He threw it into the lake. Plip. Ripples spread out, disturbing the perfect reflection of the moon. The screen fades to black, but the audio remains. We hear the sound of that first night, the thump of Johnny's hand on the wood and the wang of Elvis's nervous chord, a ghostly jam session that echoes forever in the dark. They met in a bar with no stage and no plan. One walked the line, the other fell off the edge. But for 1 hour in the smoke and the shadows, they made the world hold its breath.